Hey, thanks everyone for coming down. Yes, as you can see on the slide, we had a meeting last night of a lot of the developers involved in various tools in the packaging ecosystem for Python. None of us are happy with its current state. We're working on fixing it. There's just a lot to do and only so many people to do it, and a lot of backwards compatibility problems. But the one thing we can all agree on is setup.py install is not a good way to install software, and it must die. And so I'm going to let all the other panelists introduce themselves. And yeah, we're just working on lots of different things that will hopefully let us reach this point.
Hi, my name is Éric Araujo. I maintain DistutIls when I get some free time, which is not much. I was de facto maintainer of DistutIls 2, which is a project that tried and failed to address these problems, so we learn from that. And I also work in video games in Montreal.
My name is Marcus Smith. I'm co-maintainer of the pip and virtualenv projects. Got involved around 9 months ago, mainly from the point of view to try to keep things stable and also relevant as things are changing in the packaging community.
Hi, I'm Richard Jones. I'm the guy responsible for the cheese shop, and that phishing email that I sent out recently about passwords.
Hi, I'm Jason Coombs. I took over maintenance of Distribute roughly a year and a half ago. And recently, if you haven't seen the announcement, I'm taking over maintenance of setup tools and am working with PJ to merge Distribute back into setup tools and remove the extra. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Daniel Holth, and I wrote Wheel and some of the support code to make it work with the pip and package resources.
I'm Jim Fulton. I'm the author of ZC Buildout, which is a tool for assembling applications from Python projects, which takes a little bit different sort of approach to what it means to install a package, very application-oriented rather than sort of, you know, simply installing into a Python or virtual env.
So yeah, and so basically this session is designed to be that rather than just us saying all the different things that we're working on to try and improve the situation, we're basically interested in people coming up to the microphone and asking. And between the 7 of us, we should be able to come up with some pretty decent answers, hopefully.
The microphone is over there.
Oh, yeah, sorry, the microphone is down here, so.
Did you say who you were?
Oh, yeah, so I'm Nick Coghlan, and my job in all this is, these are the people doing the actual work. I'm the one who just says, yes, let's do that.
So the merger between setup tools and DistutIls? Distribute. I was really excited when I heard that, and then I realized I didn't really know why I was really excited, and I wondered if you could tell me.
Okay, good question. So it's the first question that anybody asks when they're trying to set up an environment is, do I use Distribute or do I use setup tools? Well, we want that question to go away. We want it to be simple. There ought to be, at least between those two, one good answer. And this will help make that answer obvious. We're going to take the best from Distribute, the Python 3 support, the dist info support, some other bug fixes that have happened, and merge those back into setup tools and get rid of the Distribute, which installs setup tools over setup tools concept, so that there's just one clean package called setup tools.
Hi, so I was wondering about support for getting version numbers out of things like Git tags. I mean, especially like having a tag for a version, but also being able to specify like the SHA somewhere in the thing that you're installing. Because right now I mean, I'm doing this by opening files and generating files that are then like within the package to indicate this kind of thing.
So one of the things we're working on at the moment is version 2 of the Python metadata specification. And so the big thing about that is it's got 2 version fields. So there's the version field, which is designed for the installation tools so that they know how to put the versions into a consistent order and do something sane rather than having to try and guess. But there's also a private version field which will just let any extra info that the package owners want to keep for their own reference, they can just chuck in the private version field. From the point of view of the installation tools, it's just a string. And so you can put hashes and get source control references and whatever you want in there. So, and then, yeah, we're doing lots of other stuff with the metadata format and defining an extension mechanism and all sorts of other stuff that you currently just have to hack around and invent your own thing is hopefully all going to be supported directly in the metadata standard. So PEP 426, I think, if you want to read the gory details.
Okay, but then just specifically, like as I understand it, like the distutils 2 approach of just having a text file where you're specifying this information doesn't lend itself to like executing something to get the version if it's not like stored in source control, but generated like when you're doing the installation. I mean, that I've done when you're doing an sdist, including this, but that if you have like a development version of this, something has to generate it. And it's, at what point should this be generated? Okay,
so that's more in the build tool side of things, which we're not trying to fix yet. we're working from the installer end forwards. Yes, there are still problems in the build chain side, but the installer problem is, I guess, hitting more people more often. And what we actually want to get to the point is that the metadata between the build chains and the installers is such that if the default build chain sucks for you, you can use a different one, and so long as it generates the right metadata, the standard installers will still understand it. And that's where we want to get with metadata 2. And then metadata 2.1 will start looking further back in the build chain, and we may even end up doing stuff as extensions.
In the short term, Setup Tools has some complications around including that sort of information as well. And I have also struggled with those same problems. And I had some discussions last night that I think there may be a solution for that. And so in the ongoing support of Setup Tools, there should be something to support that mode until the transition takes place or is available.
Great, thank you.
So a two-part question. One, what happened to distutils 2? Wasn't that supposed to go into Python 3.3? And then follow up, is there anything planned in direction of going to the standard library?
Thank you. So distutils 2 was an effort with a small group of developers, and one of the big problems was not engaging the community enough. So we had a lot of ideas like for hooks, to set the version, to change the metadata, to change the build, to change the install, but it was not defined enough. And we wanted to have static metadata, for instance, but it's static if you need to call some code to have the version. So the new approach with separating builders, the wheel format, and installers makes things clearer, because you can have hooks in your build chain, and then you generate something static. So just one example. We're working on tons of things with sometimes ill-defined behavior, and we merged distutils 2 to Python 3.3, but a month before the beta, we decided to put it back because it was really not ready. It was still mixing, building, installing, and being a generic library. It would set in stone a version 1.0, which had tons of problems. Small problems, big problems, test problems, and also problems in the PEPs themselves. So it was the hard thing to do, but I think the right thing, and we retracted packaging from the standard library. Then distutils 2 did not get more development, because it was a small team with people coming and going. And the idea was to extract really only the library part, really the like implementation of PEPs, which can be reused by all the tools. So there's one implementation of this idea which is called dislib, which goes very far to support all the setup tools concepts, maybe too far. And some version of that is going to be included into the library, standard library for Python 3.4. And the goal would be to have a basic build tool, like a Sainer distutils compiler, which can make an sdist or a wheel, and a simple installer with which you could get an updated dislib and pip and whatever you want. Does that answer your question?
Hi. I created my first two distributed or packages for the package index last night, and it's the first time I'm doing it. One package relies on the other, so I don't know really what I'm doing. So I just Googled around, and there's a lot of stuff that's like, don't use setup tools and whatever. I couldn't figure out a way to do a dependency without setup tools. So I'm wondering, is there a better option today? And if so, what is it?
No, there isn't. And that's one of the problems at the moment, is that a lot of the stuff you'll find on Google is actually bad advice.
Okay.
So this is what you get when developers fight with each other. So if you go to pythonnotes.boredomandlaziness.org, there is an essay under my, I should have put the URL on the slide. But yes, it basically starts with exactly that question and tries to give the best advice we can for right now. And that is pretty much use setup tools as your build chain and pip as your installer.
Okay.
So, well, use distribute as your build chain, but that's about to be simplified to use setup tools as your build chain. And so that'll probably be the best advice we can offer for probably most of the rest of this year, and it may change around the 3.4 timeframe.
So you said use distribute. So should I be using distribute?
Yes. Yes, basically, but that's why we want to merge it back with setup tools, because that point of confusion just shouldn't be there.
So one of my packages is using distutils and the other one's using setup tools. So should I be using distribute instead and setup tools? Or?
So distribute and setup tools both build on top of distutils. So if you don't need any of the setup tools or distribute features, then distutils is fine. The main thing is that a lot of the time, particularly once you start wanting to do dependencies, distutils just doesn't support it.
And distribute doesn't support it either?
Well, to be clear, distribute installs setup tools. So when we say use distribute, you'll still import setup tools in your setup.py.
Okay.
That's confusing. So use distribute, import setup tools, and you should be good for now. We're going to fix it. Yeah, we're fixing it.
Awesome. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so distribute is a fork that implements the setup tools package. And that's why there's that confusion.
For those of us who haven't, sorry.
Yeah, it's also important to mention distribute isn't going away. In the immediate term, you can still install it.
Right, so distribute is, we're not going to just pull the carpet out from under everyone. So if you're using distribute, if you depend on it in any way in your requirements.txt, in your install requirements, or if it's part of your build process, whatever, there will be something there. It may be distribute 0636, or we plan to have a new release once setup tools is final, the merge is complete, something to bring, a shell essentially around distribute that brings the official setup tools in the same way that distribute supplies it natively now.
Hopefully it will all become clearer over the next. Hopefully it will all become clearer over the next couple of months.
If we haven't been paying enough attention up till now, can you summarize sort of the parameters of the discussion at this point, like dropping a directory or a zip file into the path will just work, or will we still need an installer script, and what's a wheel file, and like sort of a baseline for the discussion?
So dropping a zip file still won't work because zip files have to be sys.path entries. Dropping a directory in already works. Dropping a Python file in already works. We do prefer, we will keep the installer model just because that's what gives us the metadata to do everything sensibly. Whereas if you just have a file on disk, you have no idea where it came from, what else it needs to run, when you can get rid of it. So yeah, so it will be, it's already the case that you can make a executable Python archive just by sticking a done domain file at the top of it. It's Python supported that since 2.6. We just didn't document it very well. But yeah, but yeah, the installers will still stick around. A wheel file, you can load stuff from it without installing it. But yeah, it's generally going to be the case of installing will be the recommended option. Anyone else?
Well, let me go ahead and explain what a wheel file is. So the initial implementation of it lets you generate, even though you're still using setup tools for most of the packages that you're using, you can generate something that you can install without having setup tools. So just like you might have a compiler on a development machine and not on your production machine, eventually you'll be able to have setup tools not on your production machine. But it's thank you. But it's essentially a modernization of the egg format, but it's based on the packaging PEPs.
So I may be a little out of date with some of the new packaging technologies. I just been stuck with disutil because it seems to work pretty good for enterprise installing all that type of stuff, because we can't really get to the network. It's sort of firewalled off and stuff. So I mean, from my point of view, from the packages and code that I've been writing in Python that I've been passing around, there's two things that seem to be missing. One is and it seems easy because I sort of hacked some stuff to make this happen, is a good uninstall semantic. Just generating a file that we install these files in these places and have a script uninstall them as part of the other guy's install. It seems like a simple idea, and I see a lot of people online talking about it, but I haven't seen any solution. Maybe I'm out of date. Maybe there's a better way of doing it. It seems like pip does it, but I can't really use that internally. And then I guess the second thing is that I have to work with, one of the reasons why we use Python is because it runs so well on Mac, so well on Linux, and so well on Windows. But on the Windows side, we tend to use the 64-bit version of Python, and I tend to find when people make these disutil packages and you're installing it for the 64-bit version of Python, either you would like to make MSI files, but that seems to be sort of, the support for it seems to be sort of weak, and or basically you're doing the install, the disutil doesn't see the 64-bit version. So we've had issues where people have made these sort of like self-contained packages with disutil saying, make a Windows installer executable type thing, and it runs and it says, brings up a little dialog box and it says, I don't see Python installed, but it's there, it just doesn't seem to know it's there. So I don't know if you guys know about this, but it just seems like it would be a useful thing to have improved on, because I know most of us here tend to use Unix and type systems, but I have a lot of people who use Windows, and it's for good or bad, and that's how it goes. So it'd be sort of nice if that worked better.
So the reason why there's never been an uninstall command is that the installers just haven't generated the necessary metadata, and so the tools just had no idea what had been installed, so they had no idea what to delete. And that is one of the biggest differences between easy install and pip, is that because what pip does when it installs stuff, it makes sure to generate that uninstall metadata. And so it's able to deal with that. I should have let Marcus answer that one. So unfortunately the answer is basically use pip, because the stuff in the standard library just has no idea how to do an uninstall. It will hopefully in 3.4. So pip will quite happily work with a local index, so it doesn't need to talk to the Python G-shop. It will quite happily install from local directories and local servers. So it's just a matter of getting the initial package approved for internal use.
Regarding the Windows 64-bit issue, that's an open known bug that's listed in the Python bug tracker. So that's something that needs to be fixed.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
but as you said, we have an awful lot of Linux and Mac OS X users. The Windows install story is it's a matter of getting people who choose to use it by choice and are also open source hackers.
Right.
It's a fairly small group.
No, I understand what you're saying, yes. Okay.
We recently updated the pip documentation to add a few cookbook entries, and one of them is like a fast and local install cookbook entry. I don't know if that directly answers one of your earlier questions, but you can go take a look at that and see if that helps you.
Yeah, I think it's like you guys already said, you Google stuff on the stuff, it seems you hear a lot of contradictory arguments for one way or the other, and it's hard to know what should I read. The documentation seems to be sometimes a lot out of date, so, and I understand that's hard, trust me, I know. So, I'm hopefully in the future it'll get a little more clear, so.
If you use his recipe, make a link to it.
Okay.
So I was going to ask about what you guys are doing as far as like making things better for C extensions, whether you support autoconf and that stuff. But it sounds like you guys are splitting. You said you're splitting the build from the install, and I think that's really good. So thanks for that. The other thing I'm going to ask is just how. So for those of us in the community, you guys are working on this problem. Where do we go to sort of track what you guys are doing and what sort of the latest best practices are, or like just so we can get some visibility on what's going on with this?
So I actually have this idea for a site called Python Meta Packaging. This site currently consists of a Bitbucket repo with one issue in it, which is make the site. So yes, we're aware of the problem. It's just a case of actually, I'll try to make time during the sprints to actually get at least a skeleton of that site up. And I suspect I'll be able to enlist some of these people to start populating it. Because we know that's a problem, which is the case of, we're sure there are people who are out there who are interested in helping make the packaging situation better, but it's just, there's nowhere to go to even know how to get started. The CPython dev guide doesn't talk about it, the distutils documentation doesn't talk about it. And so one of the points in making this packaging site is that we will hopefully be able to have a resource to point people to say, if you want to help, here's how to get started. And it'll probably be fairly skeletal at first, and it'll probably be the case of, well, one of the ways to help is to start populating this with the answers you can get from the people you can talk to. But yeah, we know it's a problem, and we're going to try and fix it. So,
is there an URL or somewhere like that we can write down now?
Hey? So it's under the PSF's Bitbucket account. I forget what the exact, I think I called the repo Python Meta Packaging. So I don't remember the URL off the top of my head, but Bitbucket, the PSF org account, and the Python Meta Packaging repo. And it's just an issue at the moment saying set something up with Sphinx and read the docs. And
cool, thanks.
So.
Up to this point, there's never really been good support for environment-specific dependencies, and let me explain what I mean by that. With the one example we have right now, which is tests require. We have this piece of metadata, tests require, but the support for it has never been really strong, and it's also a single use case solution, even when you do the extra work that, to make it work. I'm curious what kind of ideas might have been bandied about already about something more robust than that. Like, I would like to see something where, you have install requires, tests require, all that, plus a couple more things, and then like development requires everything tests require, plus a couple more things, like some sort of system for robust delineation of what's needed.
Do you want to take this one, Daniel? Or?
So one of the packaging PEPs, I guess metadata 1.2 introduced the idea of environment markers, which is just an expression that you can place after your requirement with things like the operating system version. And also we've, in metadata 2, we've put the extras concept into the official system. So now what you'll be able to do is to install a package bracket tests, and then it will figure out which test requires you have, and it'll be able to have different ones based on a few variables that you commonly need for environment-specific dependencies.
So just to be aware that distribute/setup tools supports this today. So you can specify, I think it's setup requires for things that you need at build time. And then there's this extra system that Daniel just mentioned that allows you to sort of define tags. And so then you can say, I require foo test or foo database or whatever, anything that you can make up. So there's a fairly general mechanism for that right now in the software that people are widely using today.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to say thank you guys for all the hard work you guys are putting in on this stuff. It's sometimes a thankless task, it seems, but we appreciate it. My question, is there plans to more strongly encourage signing for the cheese shop? I don't want to end up in a Ruby Gems situation.
Oh, you're passing the buck. Short answer is yes. Long answer is eventually.
Right.
Yeah, so yes, we've recently upgraded the Python package in the SSL cert on the central server, and the latest release of pip and hopefully one of the upcoming releases of setup tools are actually checking that cert so they know they're actually talking to the right server. And so that's kind of our main near-term step to improve the integrity of that link. Longer term, we do want to support end-to-end signing. One of the things we have to take into account is an awful lot of people distributing stuff through the cheese shop aren't professional developers. They're hobbyists, they're scientists, they're teachers, they're people who are not spending their day, spending all of their days coding. And signing packages properly is something professional coders get wrong all the time.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of challenges in doing something that is both usable by the community and also reasonably secure. But yes, we're working on it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So two issues that kind of come up over and over again when I'm installing packages. The dependency satisfaction isn't resolved until it's been downloaded and then we recur through its dependencies, et cetera, et cetera. So with the wheel format kind of being formalized now, the metadata is, I'm thinking, is a little bit more standard. Is there any, that's kind of my understanding, and is there any, are any plans to kind of determine the dependencies prior to downloading the packages in the vein of what APT does? And then a second question, which may be more appropriate, when build stuff kind of becomes the, you move on to that. Another reason that installations fail is because they end up being shared objects or dynamically loaded libraries that are provided in different ways on different platforms. And there's no affordance to put that metadata currently into setup tools to say like LXML needs like libxml2, like that's up to the LXML packages people to say that like you have to install that, right? That's like in the README. So is there any discussion for like putting that metadata in somehow? I don't know how it would be done, just kind of wanted to put it out there.
So yeah, we've definitely discussed that one. At the moment we're thinking, tackling the second question first. At the moment we're thinking it's a big enough can of worms that we'll put it off to metadata 2.1. So that's where that one's sitting currently. We're aware it's a not well-solved problem. What was the first question again?
The first question is are there any plans to like leverage the wheel format to like do dependency analysis before downloading everything?
Yes, we do want to change the way the G-Shop publishes the metadata to let the install tools get the full metadata before they download anything else. We haven't figured out an exact design for that yet, but we do want to do it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hi, occasionally I have to downgrade packages to an older version for various reasons, and I noticed that occasionally it'll leave behind the egg info directory in the dist packages folder. And then that tends to like kind of wreak havoc with Puppet when I'm trying to then re-puppetize, and it thinks I still have that newer version. So I don't know if that's a problem on your side, guys, or Puppet, but. I'm going to have to read just one of you two because I have no idea.
I'm guessing it's uninstalling the pip, so I would pass it to.
I don't recall right off that bug, but I mean, feel free to email me after or talk to me after, and I'll try to remember about that. But I know there is a very bad bug related to previous existing build directories that can cause you to install something you completely unexpect, and that is something I want to get fixed because a lot of people complained about it. But that specific case, doesn't ring a bell right now.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question about the elephant in the room, which is Python 3. So I've got a situation with packages which have different source code for Python 2.2 and 2.3. They actually siphon up modules and then build them and distribute them via the cheese shop. And I need to distribute source for Python 2 that's distinct from source to Python 3, as well as binaries for every Python release. And there doesn't seem to be any way of being able to say, pip install some package and have it get the correct Python version of that software. Is that something we can do? Is that something that's being sorted out?
Well, in PEP 425, which is a tagging mechanism, so wheel files encode the Python version as well as the machine architecture. So you can have a wheel for Python 2 and then a separate one that has had 2 to 3 run in already for Python 3, and it will know which one to grab.
What about building from source?
So SDIS 2.0 is still on the to-do list. SDIS 2.0, so...
Okay, so source distribution is on the to-do list. It's not something you're working on at the moment. Is that correct?
Yeah,
all right.
We're working back from the installer end.
Okay, because a lot of people want to be able to build their modules because they have to build it against local libraries. This is particularly for a MySQL connector, so you need to build against the correct version of MySQL lib.
So from my point of view, I need to eventually tie this into an SRPM-based build system. So yes, we will get to the build chain eventually, but we're working on the installers first.
Okay, okay, thanks.
He brought up a case, which is that pip kind of quietly supports this idea. If you qualify your archive with a Pi like 2.6 or Pi 2.3 or whatever exactly the pattern is, that you can effectively control like which versions come based on which Python version. But it's undocumented, and it's not something I'd really recommend too much. It doesn't work for easy install. Not that matters if you're using pip, but if you're curious about it, you can come talk to me after.
I'm just curious what happens if I were to have 2 different packages that depend on different versions of one other package. How is that resolved?
So basically at the moment, setup tools and package resources offers some ability to resolve that. Unfortunately, there are issues with the way package resources does that, and it will sometimes blow up on you in weird and interesting ways. So essentially what we would eventually like to have is something similar to the package resources requires mechanism that doesn't blow up in weird and interesting ways. But that's a little further down the road as to when we'll have time to work on that. At the moment, you can do some interesting things with virtual environments and star.pth files. But yeah, it's very much not an easy thing to do at the moment. I think we're out of questions. Oh, no. Here's another one.
Going back to the GPG stuff, I'm actually interested in getting involved in that, or at least following that more closely after PyCon ends. So I'm curious how best to do that. Is that the mailing list, an IRC, or is there someone that's currently trying to lead that up that I would communicate directly with?
Yeah, okay, so a whole pile of us will be around for the sprints. I'm here for all of them. I think a lot of the others are here for quite a bit of it as well. So come find us at the sprints if you're still around for those. The mailing list for most of this stuff is distutilsig@python.org.
Okay.
The stuff that involves the cheese shop is often on catalog sig at python.org. So there's a little bit of blurring of responsibilities with some of the problems in this space, but the signing stuff is mostly on catalog sig, I think.
Okay. Yeah, because I was being told earlier today that one of the problems was with not having a pure Python GPG implementation.
No, so we've been told such a thing exists. So.
Yeah, I wrote it. It doesn't. It doesn't really work. So
that's good to know too. So at the moment, there's actually a thing we're looking at. There's been a lot of academic research into the package signing and distribution problem, and some of the researchers into that have written this thing called the update framework.
Okay.
And so they've been working with us to try and devise a solution that would actually let us secure the existing PyPI distribution system. That's still an ongoing discussion on catalog sig, but they've posted a bunch of interesting ideas, and yeah, so catalog sig is the place to find the design docs, and all of that, once we get the meta packaging site written, it'll link off to all those discussions and some of those things we're exploring. But yeah, your involvement would be appreciated.
Thank you.
So, okay, we've got 5 minutes left, which will probably give us time for a few more.
As you said earlier, that if you Google for the sort of best practices for Python packaging, you get information that is outdated at best or completely wrong at worst. Over the next few months, as you guys are rewriting things, where should we be looking for the current standard of best practices?
So the most likely name will be something called Python metapackaging.readthedocs.org is, I suspect, where it will end up. And that'll probably be the best resource once we actually write it.
Why not Python packaging best practices?
Well, so at this point, so the meta packaging is actually more about the getting involved side. The best practices side, there have been a few different efforts to create those which have been accurate if your use case is the same as that of the person who wrote it. And that's kind of the fundamental problem here, is that the problems that scientists have and the problems that web developers have and the problems that system packages have are very, very different. Jim down the end there actually wrote a interesting, if you go to the Python conference page, the PyCon page, there's a entry for the mini summit we had last night. And Jim has actually written up an interesting set of use cases or typical users of Python's packaging system. That those are all the groups we have to satisfy with anything we do, and any guide will actually be what's appropriate will depend on which of those groups you fall into. So that's the challenge is with writing a best practices guide, is that the first line is always going to be, well, it depends. But yeah, we'll get something up. The meta packaging side will actually be more for a get involved developer thing, but we'll make sure we have a best practices section on that somewhere. So, thank you.
I might be asking a silly question, but just looking at the dependency resolution and installing in general, it feels like Python packaging is redoing the similar problem that the Ruby gems are trying to solve, like the app is trying to solve, like the Gentoo or FreeBSD. I would imagine there's somebody that write at least the package resolution and dependency things as a C library somewhere that everybody can import, like PCRE or something like that.
I think there is a thing called libdepsolver or something like that. But from my point of view, exactly how an installer figures out, given a package, what it needs to install, that's not my problem. That's the installer writer's problem. I just need to make sure that my goal is to actually get them the metadata they need to actually start the resolution process. But yeah, it's a reasonable thing.
In this utilities 2, for example, we had the basic dependency graph class just to track like really the dependencies. But if you had a conflict, it would not solve it because actually upgrades and dependencies is not a solved problem. There's still like a research lab in Paris from the current Debian project leader, which are working on this. So the utilities 2 mindset was to be, we can't do the right thing, so let's just provide a data structure and an installer can write its own choices. And for instance, the installer from active state has a dep graph with solving. But we were thinking the standard library should not try to get it right because it won't.
Thank you.
That's time, so thank you everyone for coming along.